So my 12 to 25 phone calls that I have to call at the end of the day, a number of those, many of them are people, and I tell everybody, if you have minor seizures, those are epileptic seizures. You have to call me, and I have to deal with them in order to get your seizures under control if I'm going to improve your quality of life, i.e. I get you your independence back in driving, which is, you know, when you talk to people about their quality of life, when you take away independence from human beings, their quality of life is impaired. And Uber has helped somewhat in this respect, but driving is clearly an important part of our functioning, our independence, and hence our quality of life.
Okay, if I understand you correctly, at this stage, on your report, you are still dealing with your diagnosis of the accused having or suffering from
yes.
juvenile epilepsy.
Yes.
And why you say there's evidence-based medicine in support of that.
Yes, I think the findings are unequivocal now, having recorded the discharges which strongly predict the presence of epilepsy, in other words, the spike and wave, and actually having recorded seizures, albeit very brief.
Yes.
The evidence is unambiguous.
If I could perhaps ask you, page 3 of your report, we still on page 33. Which, yes, page 33 of visible exhibit triple G. The top right-hand corner should be marked with a pencil, page 33, handwritten.
I've got that, yeah. But in the principal report, what paragraph is it?
When we go back to that,
Paragraph 22.
Page 7, paragraph 23.
So it's not yet halfway through his report.
So, Lord,
it's not halfway through his report.
Lord, I understand that and I'm picking up with respect that the Lordship is getting slightly irritated with me taking so long, but
No, please,
that it is really
please, it was not my intention to reflect any irritation.
It's very important that we get this properly on record in order to get to where the doctor is.
I'm trying to understand what the witness is saying and how it impacts upon this case.
Most of the questions your Lordship already raised, we will deal with in more detail later on. If you Lordship with us, bear with me.
No, certainly, Mr. Botha.
Thank you.
Take your time.
Page 33, Doctor, again. We dealt with the one seizure that we saw on the clip. If you can just briefly just read out the rest of what you also picked up on page 33 during that period of time.
So at 22:52:42, he pushes the button and he reports a very brief shiver. Now, some myoclonic movements are, you can't see them on video and you can't see them on EEG, and yet we know they're there. So you can have such a minor, you've noticed how minor that movement is. Some are so minor that you can't see the muscle move, but you can still feel it move.
And the person self-experiencing would feel...
Exactly, yes.
Sure.
Yes. And the EEG may be normal because interposed between your cortex and the electrode is your skull and subcutaneous tissues and skin. So there are several, these signals, don't forget, are microvolts small in amplitude. So and we know this because, as I explained to you earlier, sometimes we put wires directly on the brain specifically for this reason, because the wires on the outside, on the scalp, don't pick up the electrical signal.
Then at 23:03:39, you said there was a myoclonic jerk of the left for both legs.
Yeah, so that one we could see on video, but we could see nothing on the EEG. Same principles apply, what I've just told you.
Then the next one, we'll spend a bit more time with. Yes.
So here he was in stage 2 sleep. So as I said to you earlier, distinct from the normal physiological, what we call hypnic jerks, little jerks you get, or little twitches that you get as you doze off to sleep, or you enter into slumber. It's normal to get, and you might observe this in your dog too, as they drift off, a little twitch like that. Right? And that is physiologically normal. But this one, and we'll show the video in a moment, occurred in the depths of stage 2 sleep. And the movement was so substantial that it produced muscular movement of the scalp as well, and artifacts. So we couldn't see what was going on in the brain at that moment. But the movement itself was much more substantial, and occurring in the depths of stage 2 sleep is highly significant. So if you want to, you can show the video.
Yes, certainly.
We know slightly more than computers and I.
Than the rest of us.
Just escape.
The CCTV footage of the what you refer to as a major bilateral myoclonic movement while he was in stage 2 sleep.
Correct.
You just see that, please.
So you saw the movement there.
Yes.
That's more obvious than the one we showed earlier. That's adequate. I don't think you need to show anything. The rest of the footage, just in fact,
Is that the only one?
that's the only one we've got. Yes, and the footage is longer, but you don't need to spend any time on it because the nurse comes in. Him having pushed the button, it triggers an alarm. The nurse walks in, and
When that incident occurred, was he awake or sleeping?
he was asleep. And we know, the reason we know that is that that's not from the video footage, but on EEG, he's in the depths of stage 2 sleep. So he wakes up after that. The movement rouses him from sleep. The nurse comes into the ward because he then he's woken by this little seizure. He's woken, the nurse comes in and asks him what happened, and he says it was just a little shiver. We don't, and it looks like the first page of this. In fact, it's more dense than the first second of that page. So all you see is a lot of black, which is the muscular potentials, which obscures anything we can see about what's happening in the brain.
As a result of the muscular
of the movement,
it obscured the spine.
Correct.
So you just place on the record that incident shows a jerk that took place in the course of it.
Correct. So
a body jerk.
Yes, and it was abnormal body jerk in as much as it occurs not when you're going from wakefulness into sleep, but you're in the depths of sleep, and so it's well recognized in the epilepsy literature that when people get major jerks like this in the depths of sleep, that it's a myoclonic jerk. And to put it another way, I've recorded many patients with juvenile myoclonic epilepsy who've had these in sleep, and some of them where you can see the cortical signal, there's a corresponding signal. Some of them are obscured by the movement because it's
but that jerk that we saw occurs also in the ordinary course of sleep.
In the transition between wakefulness and sleep.
Yes, but you get jerks like that, but are non-epileptic jerks.
You're in the transition, but if it's occurring in the depths of sleep like that, it's considered abnormal.
So the jerk itself is not particularly abnormal, but the fact that it occurred in the depth of sleep makes it abnormal.
Exactly, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Burton?
Well, if you then, Doctor, can continue page 7, paragraph 23 of your report.
Could you?
Page 7, you said?
Yes, paragraph 23.
So it was now, the evidence was now, we'd recorded interictal abnormalities, we'd recorded small seizures or minor seizures, or what we prefer to call myoclonic jerks. And to stress, one of them was found by finding the abnormality first on the EEG, and then coincidentally there's a movement at exactly that time, and he doesn't even perceive the movement, but it's clearly visible on video. So having looked at the EEG, I then went and spoke to him. I then asked him again about the myoclonic jerks while awake, and he again said that they didn't occur at any particular time of day. Some people with juvenile myoclonic epilepsy tend to get them in the morning just after they wake up, but far from everybody. And he again said to me that his jerks typically appeared once every few days and clustered, several in a day. So again, that's very typical of many types of seizures, clustering. And then he said to me, it occurred to him that he once nearly dropped a file during one of these jerks. He'd remembered that. He spontaneously reported that.
Doctor, at this stage, the diagnosis of the acute suffering from juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, that diagnosis you made by this stage?
Yes, so the diagnosis rests, so there are other things that other much less common conditions which cause myoclonus, much rarer. So you have to have the collection of data. So juvenile myoclonic epilepsy occurs in people who are neurologically, intellectually, and otherwise normal. So you can get myoclonus in people who have bad brain diseases, like if you get hypoxic brain injury and you're left with that, or if you get a progressive neurological disease, a severe disease in the brain, you dement, or you get something goes wrong in the genes and you get a horrible disease in the brain, you get myoclonus. So those conditions undoubtedly can also produce myoclonus. But juvenile myoclonic epilepsy is a condition which most commonly starts in the teenage years or 20s. It sometimes starts in the second half of the first decade, and then there's a tail to this thing. So you sometimes see people where it even starts in the 30s, occasionally 40s, very occasionally in the 50s, and in the medical literature, I think the oldest person ever described where it started was 81. But the condition, if it occurs
so whatever the age is still referred to as juvenile.
Yes, it's still called juvenile. So it's, in a sense, it's a misnomer. Okay, and as our ability to identify this condition genetically becomes better and better, the spectrum of the age at which this starts is becoming more and more apparent. So, but the age of onset is typical. So if I get phoned by a general practitioner and told that there's a student who is out partying and drinking the night before, and he has a major seizure for the first time, the first thought that flashes through my mind is, well, you better come and see me, and he's got a genetically determined form of generalized epilepsy. Why? Because he's intellectually normal, he's neurologically normal, and we might do an MRI scan on him just to make sure that it's structurally normal. But if you're developmentally normal, you're intellectually normal, and your physical neurological examination is normal, and your MRI of the brain shows you're structurally normal, and your brain waves on EEG when you're not having these discharges are normal, and you have this age of onset, and you've got generalized seizures, tonic-clonic and myoclonus, you've got juvenile myoclonic epilepsy.
If one suffers from juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, if I understand you correctly, that could manifest by way of these myoclonic jerks, which can be fairly insignificant.
Yes.
Could people suffering from juvenile myoclonic epilepsy also experience a so-called grand mal seizure?
Yes. Yes, so I in my experience of 20-odd thousand people, I think I've seen, from memory, one or two people where they've exclusively only had myoclonus. So, and to give you an idea, juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, if you take all the epilepsies, is quite a common form of epilepsy. Somewhere 7, 8, 9% of people in different studies, of all the people with the different forms of epilepsy, and you've heard that it's common, have got generalized and juvenile myoclonic epilepsy. So it's common.
Perhaps to come back to the question he's also asked you earlier on, what in the layperson's mind out there, about somebody having what's referred to as a seizure or a fit.
Yeah.
Could somebody suffering from juvenile myoclonic epilepsy also experience a seizure to that extent?
Oh, unquestionably. So, you mean the severity on?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, we'll come back to that. But so just to reiterate the point that the vast majority of people with juvenile myoclonic epilepsy have myoclonus and major seizures at different times. And I mean, in this last week, for the first time, was consulted by someone who had a few years of these twitches and then had a major seizure. Right? So it's a common way that people present. And the significance of those little jerks is in the diagnosis of what type of epilepsy he has. It's clearly been present for a few years, and now I've diagnosed it. You know, looking backwards, the thing's been there for a few years. And that's a common type of epilepsy.
It could also be, doctor, that you spent your lifetime getting these jerks. Some form of myoclonic, juvenile myoclonic.
Yeah, you're quite right.
But you could live your life without ever knowing this.
It's a very valid point, and so it's well recognized, and you raise a broader issue, which is that population-based epidemiological studies, so those numbers that I've given you earlier about the frequency of single seizures and epilepsy in the population, every epidemiologist who works in the field of epilepsy knows that our estimates of the frequency of single seizures and epilepsy likely is an underestimate. Because
what I'm saying is this, sorry doctor to interrupt you,
yeah,
is that they get these jerks, as you call them, but it doesn't impair their daily functioning.
Yeah.
So people just ignore them.
Exactly.
That's sometimes.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct, and that's why they sometimes present years after the symptoms manifest, and sometimes decades. So, I mean, to give you an idea.
But does it? Sorry to interrupt you. Does it over years does it become worse?
Or
could it become worse?
The a couple of aspects to that. So when you take, and I said to you, there are different types of epilepsy. So if you take the genetic ones, the most common question I get asked is, well, there are two questions I get asked. The moment I discuss this with a patient like Mr. van Breda, the usual retort, and I usually try and preempt all of this by explaining everything to them, is the question they get asked is, well, if you say I've got a genetically determined form of epilepsy, why is there nobody in my family with it? Right? Fair question. And I just lost my train of thought. And the second question is, why on earth does it start at this age? You're telling me, my genes have been there since day one. Why does it start now? So just to deal with each of those, firstly, the analogy I draw for patients is as follows. Your facial appearance is determined by a bunch of genes, right? And you have a unique facial appearance. The forms of generalized epilepsy largely are not one gene, but multiple genes, and we know this from genetic studies, that cause these forms of epilepsy, like juvenile myoclonic epilepsy. So you have a particular combination of genes that you get from your mother and your father, and you'll just to chuck into the mix, you get a few mutations yourself, and you end up with a unique combination of genes. That's why other people in the family haven't got it, and you've got the epilepsy, and yet it's genetically determined. The question then about why does it start at this age, and why is it not there from the day you're born, or even while you're lying in your mother's womb, when you're perfectly entitled to have seizures, is as follows. Your facial appearance changes over time as you grow older. And that is also a genetic code that's running its course. Genes are being turned on and off. The expression changes. Your facial appearance changes. The same thing electrically is happening in the brain. And proof of that is simply, if you take the behavior of 60-year-olds and you compare them to 5-year-olds, their behavior as a group of 60-year-olds is different to 5-year-olds. Right? So things are different. And so these particular genes, and we still need to prove this genetically, but presumably genes are being turned on and being turned off. And that's why, as a group, in fact, funnily enough, the genetic forms of seizures are the ones that you're most likely to so-called outgrow in time again. So if you've had a brain injury and you've got epilepsy from that, that's the type of epilepsy which you're least likely to outgrow. The genetic forms of the epilepsies, by contrast, are ones where you're most likely to outgrow. So it gives you some idea of the complexity of the genetic forms of seizures.
I think I talked about the question that might be pertinent is somebody suffering from juvenile myoclonic epilepsy. Could such a person, or how rare or how common is it for such a person to go through his or her entire life without ever experiencing grand mal seizure and only experiencing myoclonic jerks?
Fair question. So the short answer is we don't know, because short of neurologists seeing 7.5 billion people on the planet and asking them about the symptoms and doing EEGs on them, we won't know. But presumably there are some people walking out there who've just got myoclones, who maybe they're destined to get a grand mal, but maybe some of them never will. We just don't know.
And with people who have been diagnosed with juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, how common is it for those people to only have suffered myoclonic jerks as opposed to also grand mal?
Well, as I said to you, in my practice, I've only seen, I think, 1 or 2 patients ever who've exclusively had myoclonus only as the manifestation of juvenile myoclonic epilepsy.
All the other ones have been diagnosed with.
Yes, so as your Lordship said, when patients come to us, it's when the big ones occur. It's only when we look backwards, that we can, backwards in time that is, that you can see that this thing's been there for a while.
I follow. Then, bottom paragraph 24, we just complete carrying on with the report.
On the Sunday then, his girlfriend, who'd known him since February of 2016, commented that she'd noticed these jerks previously, and in fact she said this to me spontaneously. She said that after one of what they called a shiver, she'd on a few occasions, I'm not sure how many, had said to him, "Are you okay?" So she'd noticed something.
Then paragraph 25, further, we will just take this through that.
The issue then, this is on page 8, eh?
Yes.
So then I asked him about what he felt like from the moment he'd woken up from the period of amnesia on the night of the murder. And he said, "I was disorientated, I was in shock." He added that he has no recall of some of the questions that were put to him, and that he was told that he evidently did not answer some questions. Obviously, he was told this, so he doesn't know whether he did or didn't. And his words to me was, "I was not in a clear mind space." So,
Yes.
shall I continue?
Yes.
He remembers then phoning the emergency services. He recalls going outside to meet them. He also remembers that they sat him down in the passageway outside the front door of the house. He's unsure how much time he spent there. He has no recall of the arrival of the ambulance itself, so he doesn't remember the ambulance arriving, but he remembers while he was sitting there the paramedics walking past him. He doesn't remember getting in the ambulance, and he has a very vague memory of being in the ambulance. He remembers that a patch was put on the stab wound on the left side of his abdomen, and he also remembers that he was moved from the ambulance to a police car subsequently, and he recalls being asked questions at the police car, and he remembers being taken to the police station. He also remembers, to quote him, bits of the interrogation at about midday.
There's one aspect, Doctor, in the second line of paragraph 26, you said he also remembers that they sat him down the passageway outside the front door of the house. Was he referring to the emergency services people? Who did he tell you who sat him down?
I'm not sure, actually. Sorry,
Sure.
My recall of that's poor.
Then, paragraph 27, you continue, you said the physical neurological examination. Did you then perform the physical?
I performed that on the Sunday morning, and in the diagnostic process of epilepsy and those sorts of things, in terms of valuable information, the actual physical examination is not terribly helpful. in the diagnosis of juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, it's simply to confirm that the neurological examination is normal. If it wasn't, then you have to raise questions about the diagnosis of juvenile myoclonic epilepsy.
Then, Dr. in paragraph 28, you also may mention the fact that you had cited the MRI scan of the accused brain. It was done on the 25th of July 2017.
Yes.
Dr. Dutevo testified as well, also made reference that you can perhaps also confirm this appeared to be normal, except for the cyst in the fourth ventricle, which is a coincidental finding.
Yes, I confirm that I looked at the scan, and just to be completely pedantic about the whole thing, I showed it independently to a neuroradiologist who came to the same conclusion.
Then, Doctor, I don't think we need to spend too much time on paragraph 29 when you counseled him about the diagnosis. But you just informed him as to what will happen from then onwards.
Yes, I think it's you know, obviously he's got to know what he's got.
Yes.
He's got to know what he's in for. He's got to know how long he's going to have treatment for. He's got to know about the drugs work in many people, but not everybody. He's got to know that there are potential side effects of the drugs, and that is relevant because, as I say to everybody, the stuff's got to be like using toothpaste. It must prevent trouble and it mustn't cause trouble. So if he's got side effects, as my Lordship has pointed out, that impairs your quality of life. It doesn't make your quality of life any better if you're tired all day, or you're gaining a lot of weight, or you're feeling poorly, or you're feeling dull, or whatever. So he has to know that what the potential side effects of this individual medication is that I put him on, and he must know that if that or any other side effects happens, he picks up the telephone, he lets me know, so that we can try and improve his quality of life.
We can perhaps get that on record as well, that on that Sunday it's correct that you and I spoke telephonically.
Yes, so
Sorry, Doctor, before I forget this, if I could take you back to paragraph 25.
25? Yes.
He added that he had no recall of some of the questions that were put to him. By whom were the questions put to him?
During I asked him about the period from when he woke up to the morning period, the next few hours. And he said that evidently he was told that he wasn't answering some of the questions. Those were his words.
He was told that?
He was told that he evidently hadn't answered some of the questions that he was, I think that he was sitting, or I'm not sure of the exact details, to be honest.
And I want to talk about that. Just before that, he has no recall of some of the questions. By whom were the questions put to him? Do you know?
I'm not sure. I don't know whether it was the emergency services or the police. Or whether, during the next few hours. Yeah.
I was going to ask you this, Doctor, when Mr. Tom Dart testified, he said that he was asked questions by some of the police officers there as well, but he cannot recall the details of those questions. Could that be what he was referring to?
I would think so, yes.
Will this be a convenient time to take the lunch in German?
Certainly, Mr. Werther, we shall adjourn to 4:00.